is the helicopter age. For city centre to city centre travel, for 100 uses in the service of the army, for anti-submarine warfare, for rescue, for almost anything in the way of short and medium-haul passenger and freight services, the helicopter is the modern answer. There is almost no limit to what it can do. It can hover and hold its position a few feet from the ground, or at a touch of the controls, it can circle, or for that matter, go backwards. It can land and take off from almost anywhere, from a lawn, from the water, or from a car park. It can service light buoys or take photos, as of this volcano, while you hover, or make rescues while the lifeboat waits. The next sequence is historic because it shows that great pioneer Igor Sikorsky making some of his early flights in 1934. He used at first triple lifting rotors, and here he is seen making one of his very first experimental flights, ending in a landing on the water. At this time, Igor Sikorsky was, even as he flew, teaching himself to fly this form of aeroplane, the helicopter. Later, other developments of this triple rotor machine were flown by Sikorsky, and even at this early stage he was able to show that maneuverability which is so typical of the rotating wing machine. Eventually he decided that the single rotor, whether driven by one or two engines, was the most satisfactory for future development. From that moment, the growth of the helicopter as we know it today was clearly foreshadowed. It was foreshadowed even down to landing on the deck of a ship at sea, which here we see being done by one of the earliest R-4s, a plane familiar on many fronts in World War II. Aerobatics are not normally called for from a helicopter, but they can be used to show the degree of control from a single rotor. Looping the loop, for instance, which I, for one, have never seen done before by a helicopter, and indeed is here being done for the very first time. And we can also have this swings and roundabouts performance very near the ground. These are the planes which, for more sedate use, are now being produced in scores by Westlands. This view of the S-51 shows that even when the blades are revolving, they are set high enough for the passengers to approach in perfect safety. The undercarriage, too, is set high to give ground clearance over bad terrain. The S-51 holds 3 passengers side by side with lighting and ventilation and cubic space for freight. The instrument pedestal is well grouped. The pedals control the tail rotor, and the lever works the pitch of the main rotor, and a twist grip works the throttle. The starting procedure is simple and normal, and the engine drives the rotors direct, a hallmark of the true helicopter. The tail rotor, which corrects the torque and is also a rudder, is geared to the main drive. During a gentle and characteristic takeoff, the action of the Westland S-51 oleo suspension on the wheels can be studied and photographed as though the whole plane was on a test bench. The hydraulic hoist worked by the pilot is a great feature of the S-51. It can lift 400 pounds, and also, underneath, there can be a quick release lifting beam to take half a ton. "1947 was a key year for the helicopter in Britain. In June that year, Westlands gave Europe its first public demonstration of the modern helicopter at a show at Barnes. Realizing that Britain must develop the helicopter with the minimum of delay, Westland Aircraft, earlier that year, had decided to manufacture the now famous S-51 in England, British-built with British materials and to British standards at Yeovil. There followed many demonstrations, and both airlines and the general public were shown that Britain was far from being left behind in the harnessing of the helicopter to the great opportunities which awaited it. At Hampton Park in Glasgow, the Westland S-51 ran through a full repertoire of its versatility which was both over the land and, later as we shall see, over a make-believe sea. Carrying loads to lorries on the ground and carrying relief to a light buoy. But throughout all these demonstrations, far-sighted Scotsmen were thinking of helicopter transport, of the serrated and difficult coasts of the west and the north, and of a new road to the Isles. The more one thought about it, the more varied became the possible uses of the helicopter. Trinity House had tests at one of their lighthouses, and the Royal National Lifeboat Institution saw in it a help for them. They saw in this S-51 here being demonstrated a more modern version of the breeches buoy. Then came the drama of the Wolf Rock. For weeks, bad weather had cut off the lighthouse keepers from the mainland and from their essential supplies. It was the Westland S-51, flying in a gale, which came to the rescue and brought in the food which nothing, no one else, and no other vehicle could bring. From now on, the Westland helicopters were constantly hovering over the news columns, taking these pictures of Queen Elizabeth II, then Princess Elizabeth, as she launched the Cunarder Coronia from Westland's parent company, Messrs. John Brown's yard at Clydebank. And then a record. Passengers were carried from the centre of London to the centre of Paris, taking off from a rooftop at Olympia and landing in Les Invalides. This was the fastest passenger journey between city centre and city centre ever made between the two capitals. Taking private enterprise even further, Westlands then organised a helicopter link-up along a triangle between Sheffield, Manchester, and Leeds Bradford. This demonstration emphasised to all civic authorities the need for providing for the helicopter services of the future. The first regular helicopter passenger service to be started in Britain was another Westland private enterprise in 1950 between London and Birmingham for the full fortnight of the British Industries Fair. With scores of machines coming off the Westland production line, it became necessary to train pilots to fly them. At Yeovil was started the first British helicopter school, and to it came pilots from all over the world. Meanwhile, production was stepped up to keep pace with large orders from civil and from military authorities. The rotor blades are the wings of a helicopter, and only in the Westland helicopters are these wings of metal. The result of this advanced practice is an increase of strength, an ease of maintenance, and above all, additional safety in the air. The S-51 uses an Alvis Leonides engine of 550 horsepower. It is tested, and then it is mounted vertically in the center section of the helicopter, where it is placed accurately on the center of gravity. Above the engine comes the driving mechanism for the blades, the clutch, the main gearbox and the rotor shaft, the fan which cools the engine, and the rotor hub, which we think you will agree is a beautiful piece of precision engineering and of careful assembly. The servo mechanism of this section of the rotor hub assembly is an exclusive Westland's feature, which relieves the pilot of the work of flying. And now the successor to the S-51, the larger Westland S-55. This too is in full production, a 10-seater and the largest British helicopter available. It carries forward the thought and the design of the earlier S-51 to wider use, and many paths pioneered by its smaller brother can now be consolidated by this roomy and weight-lifting machine. Under the same roof at Yeovil, the demand for both types of helicopter is being matched by parallel production. And so the S-55 is now taking its place in the lineup at the delivery bay. And here it is. This bigger plane was first shown flying in the middle of 1950, and it is the most modern helicopter now available in the whole of Europe. The pilot's view of the S-55 is that it is the most docile of helicopters, and its maneuverability, both in the air and onto confined spaces of the ground, bear out this verdict. The S-55 has a payload of over 1,800 pounds, a range of over 400 miles, and a most useful service ceiling of 15,000 feet. The direct ascent can be quite spectacular too, and here are two examples of what the helicopter experts now call the controlled spiral takeoff. In overall size, the S-55 is very little bigger than the 51, and the lines of the family breeding right back to the earliest days are still clear to see. The seating is on most comfortable lines. In the cabin can be carried either passengers or an alternative of a ton of freight, and the sliding door makes for easy entry. In the cockpit is full instrumentation, and there are side-by-side seats for pilot and co-pilot with full dual control. The S-55 still carries that most useful winch. Operated by the pilot, it can make light of hoisting a man, or, for that matter, of two men. This hoist rounds off the versatility of the Westland helicopters. Maintenance costs are kept down by making the engine accessible. There are no complicated cowlings to fiddle with, and all inspections can be done at ground level. The Westland system of blade folding does much to make the storage of the helicopter easy, on land and, more importantly, on board a ship at sea, or, of course, in a hangar. The S-55 as a military transport is rewriting the book of tactics. The military experts are already studying, in the light of what has been done in Korea, the possibilities of this airborne line of communication, which can run from literally anywhere to anywhere. In fact, they have coined a phrase for it. They call it vertical envelopment. This is the kind of surprise attack which can make gliders and paratroops seem old-fashioned. As a hospital plane, the S-55 can take away 6 stretcher cases at a time and so become, in truth, a lifeline from the front. For the navies, too, the helicopter has become a sort of trifibious jeep, at home on land, on the water, and in the air, linking ships with shore and ship with ship. These dramatic pictures show an actual rescue at sea of the pilot of a ditched fighter aircraft, only one of many such rescues which have been made in Korean waters. As a communication aircraft from ship to ship, the helicopter is in daily use. It is indeed the Admiral's barge and the staff officer's joy. Back to the Army, to Korea, and to the many facets of helicopter troop cooperation, servicing an advanced post, or waiting on an aerial cab rank for orders which might well send it, as this helicopter was sent, to the help of an enemy-surrounded hilltop detachment, and which, quite clearly from these pictures, could be reached by no other vehicle. The war in Korea has quickly spotlighted possibilities of the S-55. Time and time again, whole battalions of troops have been carried by it from a small cleared acre to the firing line over terrain which it was otherwise impossible to cross. In one operation, 12 of these machines in 4 hours carried troops and weapons for 4 miles of fighting line, and the helicopters carried in with them not only the goods of war, but the element of complete surprise. This is the country over which the men did not have to march. The helicopter, too, can take an offensive role, as indeed it does with incendiary bombs in Korea. And all the time, the troops know that the helicopter ambulance service is always at call, no matter how isolated their post or how difficult is their situation. It is one of the biggest factors in Allied morale in the Far East. The S-55 or the S-51 with special stretcher attachments run direct from front line to base hospital or even straight out to a hospital ship. Another factor in morale is the quickness of relief for tired forces. There are no weary hours of marching down the line. The ubiquitous S-55 is here, as everywhere, on the job. In Malaya, as in Korea, there is a job for the helicopter to do. The patrols, hemmed in by thick and relentless jungle, fighting nature, fording leech-filled rivers, have no link with base save that of the air. In the old days, as in Wingate's Burma days, the supplies came down the chimney by parachute. But it was often a hit-or-miss business. Chutes were caught in trees, necessities were lost in unreachable places. But today the helicopter takes over, and service of supplies or of men is safely made even at the hover over the mud. Here is one at least of those earlier demonstrations now come to realistic life. More important, at least so we hope, is the civil use of the helicopter. Uses such as this, as an aerial crane on a dam building site. Again, when an American train was snowbound, it was the helicopter which saved the day. The scene could be reached by no other vehicle, yet the supplies were taken there, the casualties were evacuated, and a disaster was probably averted. A less dramatic but a more universal use of the helicopter is at airports for cutting out those bus journeys between air terminal and city centres. Schedules now envisaged will turn hours into minutes and make a direct link away from all the traffic. As a contrast, the oil fields simplify their pipeline maintenance patrols by helicopter, decimating inspection time and speeding men, materials and tools to places which are days away on the ground. As a platform for scientific observation, the helicopter is often used, as in these remarkable pictures of a volcanic eruption, the first continuous observation ever made. Then there are the postal services, already successfully run over the broad, flat lands of East Anglia, where roads and railways are few and far between. And so, as in all things, the story of progress goes on, from the flying frames of the young Sikorsky to this Westland S-55, with its promise of the great commercial transports which will one day, and not so far distant, depend upon rotating wings. Westlands are already planning ahead. The W-80 project, a twin Hercules 35-seater, meets the latest specification for feeder line travel. And the Westland Project 81, a twin jet-engined helicopter, capable of greater speeds and increased payloads. These are the key machines of the real helicopter age. They are leading to the giants, giants which will lift many tons and carry great loads or passengers or troops by the hundred. In these, as in the present helicopters, Westlands lead the way in the proved belief that for many, many things there is no other vehicle.